Wrongful imprisonment. Most of us don't think about it often, since we never see what goes on behind bars. Not many people are interested in hearing the stories of those convicted, and very few people want to feel sorry for them. They're criminals, right? Most of the time, yes, they are. But, according to a PNAS study, 1 in 25 death row inmates were found innocent of their crimes after they were executed. There's a shocking margin of supposed criminals who are completely innocent. This is due to a number of factors ranging from racial profiling to court errors to corruption. Most cases aren't even clear-cut, with multiple causes being cited for the error. The sad truth is, the court is almost never willing to admit a mistake, and those wrongfully imprisoned are released with nothing more than a small financial compensation. Would you be willing to trade 17 years of your life for $2 million? This is the choice that some unlucky individuals don't get to make. Court corruption can be a very serious problem in some areas of the US. This can come from different levels and for different reasons. Police can be convinced to make an arrest based on bribes, and court officials like juries and forensic analysts can be biased or bribed into changing a verdict. These actions violate a number of human rights laws, mainly and especially Article 9, which states that no person can be arbitrarily arrested or detained. For an example of this, let's take a look at a case involving the murder of a Chicago couple in 1978. 4 men, including a man named Vernil Jimerson, were placed at the scene of the crime by Paula Gray, who claimed to be an eyewitness of the murder. Jimerson was convicted based on 2 things. 1, Paula Gray's testimony, which was later found out to be fraudulent, and 2, based on blood testing, which should have excluded Jimerson as a suspect. Both he and the victims were blood type O, and type A blood was found on the victims. Analysts failed to bring this point up and instead condemned Jimerson. He and the other 3 defendants, who would later be known as the Ford Heights 4 because of their wrongful conviction, were all sentenced to varying amounts of prison time, with Jimerson and one other man sentenced to death. Jimerson was offered opportunities to avoid prison, but refused to testify against his friends. He spent 11 years behind bars before the evidence was retested and Jimerson was finally excluded from the suspect list. What can we learn from this case? Well, it's a prime example of a court corruption. The case was biased due to suspicion of guilt, which explains why the analyst didn't come forward with the evidence. It was easier to just arrest somebody for the murders than to go through the effort of actually confirming guilt. This is a violation of the innocent until proven guilty portion of law, and can be very dangerous when bias is placed on someone just because it's easy. The combination of false testimony by Paula Gray and a failure by the forensic analyst to, well, do her job, was the cause of this wrongful imprisonment. While court corruption can be a problem, sometimes humans do make mistakes. There are some cases where genuine errors are made by somebody, usually the victim. While this isn't as serious, it still violates human rights laws due to the small compensations offered to those wrongfully accused and the disruption it causes within their home and community, a violation of Article 12. A very common example of this is eyewitness misidentification, which is exactly what it sounds like. Someone happens to look a lot like a supposed suspect, and an uncertain person claiming they might have maybe kinda saw you leaving the scene of the crime is enough to convict. It was stated by the Innocence Project, an organization that works to help those wrongfully accused, that eyewitness misidentification has played a role in more than 70% of wrongfully convicted individuals. One such case is the case of Jennifer Thompson Canino, who was sexually assaulted in her apartment in 1984. Police lined up photos of 9 individuals, and Jennifer picked out the picture of Ronald Cotton, who had some experience with trouble. He was convicted and arrested only for DNA analysis to bail him out a decade later. There was no corruption in this instance, it was just an honest mistake made by the victim who misremembered her attacker's face. There are a number of components that can go wrong to cause wrongful conviction to occur. The question is, what can we do to change the system so that no human rights laws are violated? Well, improving the kinds of evidence we rely on can help in making sure that random claims from random sources aren't counted as fact, but the main issue is the lack of compensation offered to those wrongfully accused. It's hard for a court to admit that they made an error, since that damages their credibility. The easiest way to fix the lack of recognition to an innocent man is to increase compensation. How? Well, courts do offer small monetary apologies to some convicted, but getting the courts to admit a mistake and give out bigger sums of money, especially sums that are more heavily based on how long the sentence was, will help things a lot. Because not only does a bigger financial loss help the wrongfully convicted get back on their feet, but it forces courts to be a lot more careful in who they convict, because they don't want to lose more money. The other easy fix to eyewitness misidentification is removing the bias. For an example of a biased eyewitness testimony, the American Judges Association cites a specific case in their article about eyewitness misidentification. It was the case of McKinley Cromedy, who supposedly raped a college-age white female. Cromedy was black. He was brought in after the victim spotted him crossing the street and targeted him due to an unnatural walking cycle, or swagger as she put it. Cromedy was picked up and police asked the victim to identify if Cromedy really was her assailant. The victim said she was sure this was him. Cromedy was the man who attacked her. The bias becomes obvious when we think about the circumstances. Cromedy was picked up after the victim noticed he had a similar limp to her attacker. If she saw him, of course she would assume this was the man who was at fault. The proper procedure from this point should have been to have a lineup of multiple suspects who fit the description of her attacker, and for the victim to decide which man was her attacker. That would have removed the suspicion bias, because the victim wouldn't have known which man was the one she identified. Instead, police had her look at Cromedy one-on-one and basically ask, "Was it him who attacked you?" There was a heavy implication towards him since there were no other suspects and Cromedy was literally identified by the victim. He was found innocent after the Supreme Court overruled his sentence, but it wasn't until DNA forensics came to the rescue that all suspicion disappeared. Cromedy's case is a prime example of bias in eyewitness testimony. If we can give all suspects a fair, unbiased chance to prove that they're innocent, and all victims an unbiased opportunity to find the real culprit of their crimes, less misidentification will occur. The most talked about and arguably most serious cause for wrongful conviction is racial profiling. It's everywhere, from juries to police officers, and it's the violation we hear most about through news reports. This is an obvious violation of Human Rights Article 7, which forbids discrimination before the law. There are tons of cases of this, but we are going to look at Habib Wahir Abdal, previously known as Vincent Jenkins, a black man accused of raping a white woman. The victim said her attacker had a gap between his teeth, was around 5'9", and was wearing a hooded jacket. Abdal was picked up for questioning a few months after the incident happened, even though he didn't fit the description. He was too tall and had no gap between his teeth. Furthermore, when his hair was tested against the hair found at the scene of the crime, they were different hairs. The forensic analyst stated that different hairs could come from the same person. That doesn't make any sense, but based on the evidence listed, Abdal was sentenced to 20 years of prison. Based on the obvious interference between what the witness and forensic results say and the verdict given, it seems the fact that Abdal was simply black was the only reason he was found guilty. There was no evidence he had even been at the scene of the crime. The court convicted him because it was easier to do so, and because he fit the only description of the attacker that mattered: black. If you need more proof, consider that even when DNA tests were done on bodily fluids and other factors later on, the results did end up proving Abdal innocent. But prosecution argued against the glaring proof that he was innocent. With scenarios like this, it becomes clear that there's no real quick solution to racism in the justice system. It's a deep-seated part of society that stays with us, even though it was supposedly made illegal long ago. In order to change the unfair bias set in place at the moment, we need to look further than what's on the surface and trust the facts, because when solid proof is ignored for no reason other than to convict, there is something wrong with the system. There is no way the criminal justice system will sort itself out soon. It will take years, even decades, to change the ways we have now. The first step in any situation like this is getting the word out. So, share this video, and try to learn more about the unfair legal trials and arrests that are made daily around the US. Most people don't pay attention to the prison system because, well, why would we? I don't plan on going to jail, so why should I care? That's the thought process most people have, until they find themselves accused of a crime they didn't commit. The catalyst for change is knowledge, and once we can uncover the truth about what goes on in closed courtrooms, we can stop this from happening. Unfair imprisonment may be the biggest human rights issue in the US right now. Be aware and make a change. If we all do our part, nobody will have to suffer for someone else's wrongdoings.